We are learning more about this now as shocking new reports come in on Marines serving in Afghanistan being told to look the other way while Afghan commanders sexually abuse boys who are brought to their bases. A former Special Forces captain telling the New York Times, quote, "The reason we are here is because we heard the terrible things that the Taliban was doing to people, how they were taking away human rights. But we were putting people into power who would do things that were worse than the Taliban did." Huge emotional conflict in an awful situation for him. And I'm joined now by Pete Hegseth, the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and a Fox News contributor. Pete, good morning. Good to have you here. This is it's a tough story. And we reported earlier on Dan Quinn, who believes that part of the reasons that he was removed from the Special Forces was because he had information that one of the trained Afghan commanders had been abusing a boy who was chained to a bed, and that when he confronted this individual, he hit him because of his anger about what he knew was going on. And he believes that that's part of the reason that he has been that he had been disciplined himself. I mean, it's an awful story. You know, your thoughts on what's going on here?
Absolutely. There's another First Sergeant Martland who's currently likely being pushed out for the same reasons. They confronted an Afghan commander who was molesting little boys. This is a very common practice, unfortunately, in Afghanistan. The cultural chasm between America and there couldn't be wider. I served in Afghanistan. There was a commander on our base who had Chai boys with him, multiple of them. We never had direct evidence of him sexually assaulting them, but there was this aura of uncertainty. There was this squeeziness of, you know, what are they doing there? Why are they young, sort of effeminate-looking boys? Why are they always? It didn't feel right. Yet, because of our mission there to work with the Afghans and partner with them, it wasn't necessarily our job to dive in and investigate every aspect of that relationship. Had we had, I think, direct evidence, visual, we probably would have attempted to step in. But it's clear the military justice system is not all that interested in troops stepping in. So an impossible scenario for these guys, especially out at the front lines, who are trying to partner, but then see these egregious things being done to young boys and can't step in.
It's horrible. This quote is from Gregory Buckley Sr., who is the father of a Marine who was killed while he was working out. He was, wearing shorts and a tank top at the time. He was working out, and a young person walked in and shot him point blank. And his father says that he told him, "At night we can hear them screaming, but we're not allowed to do anything about it." And the father goes on to say, "My son said that his officers told him to look the other way because it is their culture." I mean, what do you make of this, Pete? I mean, war is an ugly situation. And obviously, in this case, we're dealing with people who are just medieval in their behavior. It's just appalling.
It's biblical times in many cases with AK-47s and cell phones. The reality is, in this particular case, someone had alerted these Marines to the terrible things this commander had done, who kept these Chai boys. Nothing was done about it, and this Marine was killed. That's why they're in the middle of a lawsuit. You want to believe we're there for the right reasons. You want to believe those we're partnering with have the best of intentions. Sometimes they exploit their new elevated status to have at the population, including young girls and mostly young boys, Chai boys. It's a practice no one condones on the American side, but in trying to forge partnerships and allegiance, oftentimes we kind of step back and say, well, it is just their culture. What can we do about it? We'd be spending all of our time investigating these relationships if we weren't out there fighting the Taliban at the same time. It's really, really hard.
This is a quote from Colonel Brian Tribus, the spokesman for the American command in Afghanistan. He says, "Generally, allegations of child abuse by Afghan military or police personnel would be a matter of domestic Afghan criminal law. There would be no express requirement that U.S. military personnel in Afghanistan report it." And, but it becomes even more complicated in the case of Martland because, he feels that he was, kicked out of his own U.S. military special forces position because he stepped in and reprimanded a person who was doing this. Well, that's a tough one to figure out.
it shouldn't be that way. That is absolutely wrong. The American soldiers who stepped in should be lauded for it, should be given an award for it, and rather than kicked out. As far as the Afghan judicial system's concerned, problem is it really doesn't exist within a lot of these military units. So reporting it to the Afghan civilian justice system means these commanders are going to act with impunity. I know that soldiers and Marines step in. I know that I have evidence of times when they've done it in the past, and they lecture about human rights, about dignity, but there's a sick culture there within the Afghan society where these things are just sort of understood. There's a sexual repression that leads men and young boys, much like sort of prisons. It's horrible, but it shouldn't prevent us from fighting the Taliban. That's the problem.
Stark reminder of how very, very different things are in some of these places. Pete Hegseth, thank you very much. We got to go.
Thank you, Martha.